All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Inside BC's 2026 Building Electrification Roadmap. My name is Mariko McCashew, and I am the Program Manager for the Building to Electrification Coalition, also known as B2E, here at the Zero Emissions Innovation Center, otherwise known as ZEEC. I'd like to start the webinar off in a good way. I'm joining from the traditional and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. And at ZEEC, we respectfully acknowledge that our staff and collaborators live and work across British Columbia on the territories of many First Nations who have stewarded these lands and waters since time immemorial. My colleague Victoria is going to drop some details about getting continuing education credits for attending today's webinar into the chat. And she's also going to launch our first poll to help us get a sense of who's here today. So today you're going to hear about the 2026 update to BC's Building Electrification Roadmap. It was created with input from over 200 stakeholders, many of whom were probably on this call today. Oh, sorry, I'm sharing my screen and I cannot see now. 1 second. Oh, I have to move things around. Sorry, everybody. Okay, so the roadmap is divided into 4 sectors, and it's going to help us advance actions within the province. You're going to hear more about this in a second. So BC's Building Electrification Roadmap was made available just a couple weeks ago. If you have not yet had a chance to read it, we'll be dropping the link into the chat so you can download it and follow along. Today, you're going to hear from the BERM's primary author, Tom Burkout. He's going to tell us all about some of the most important actions and how the roadmap was developed and things that you need to take note of. Tom Burkout is he is a consultant at Birch Energy and Climate Consulting. Tom has a PhD from UBC in resource management and environmental studies, and has been working for over 15 years on building decarbonization policy, strategy, and implementation. Tom was involved with the research and writing of both the 2021 and 2026 BC Building Electrification Roadmaps, and does a lot of work to support climate policy for local and regional governments. So Tom, I will pass it along to you.
Thank you. Let's see if I can. Okay, hopefully you can now see my screen. Excellent. All right, thanks. Yeah, before I get going here and presenting on the 2026 BERM, I think it's important I want to thank people that helped. There was a lot of people who put this roadmap together and who participated in different ways. I want to first of all thank the more than 200 people who participated in the engagement through interviews, focus groups, workshops, provided written feedback on an earlier draft of the BERM. The steering committee that helped guide us strategically over about a 10-month period, and for all their support and time that they gave. ZEEC, the Zero Emissions Innovation Center, and all the team there. And there's all kinds of support that was provided. And I particularly want to thank Mariko it was great. I really, really enjoyed collaborating with Mariko on the roadmap. And just like a big shout out for all the work that Mariko does, has been doing for the last 4 years and continues to do to advance building electrification in BC and beyond. And finally, I wanted to thank my co-author, Lisa Westerhoff, who in all her great ideas and incredible engagement that she brought to the project as well. And also, I just want to take a moment to remind ourselves of everything we've accomplished since the 2021 roadmap was published. So 5 years ago, I feel like I was much greener then as far as building electrification goes. But I think it's important to remember all that's happened since. So 5 years ago, there was no B2E. There was no B2E coalition with their 250 plus members. There was no zero carbon step code. There wasn't a single municipality that adopted it because they couldn't have adopted it. There were no programs for MURBs and needs-based households as well. And BC Hydro was still working off of its fairly outdated extension policy that, at the time was putting most of the risk for any extension on the developers. And that has changed over the last 5 years and has made significant differences in new construction front. And I think it's also important to remember there's been like tens of thousands of buildings built that are all or nearly electric in the last 5 years, right? And continuing to build off that momentum as well. And it's important to remember that. We often, we rush ahead to the next thing, but it's important to remember that by working together, the things that we are accomplishing and supporting the decision makers as well to make those decisions. So this is the cover of the 2026 roadmap. Hopefully, a number of you have had a chance to dig into it a little bit already, and we look forward to discussing it further today. The goal of the roadmap was to look at the next 5 years and key actions that need to happen across the 5 different building sectors. So commercial, institutional, apartment style, ground oriented, and new construction. And then with the goal to, in 20 years' time, that most buildings in BC will be electrified or mostly electrified. And why building electrification? Probably most people on this call know that already. First of all, reducing GHG emissions. We're lucky enough to live in a province with one of the cleanest grids in North America, if not the world. And so every time a building switches from gas or another fossil fuel to electricity, it's instantaneously, dramatically reducing its GHG emissions. There's also the job creations that come with building electrification throughout communities, like throughout BC, the communities and thousands of jobs that would be created there. Something that's not talked about very much, I think we often hear about the price differential between electricity and natural gas, but also think about the chart on the bottom right here. It shows the rate stability over the last 5 years between BC Hydro and then Fortis. These are the residential rates. And you can see the Fortis residential rates have increased by more than 40% over that time, whereas BC Hydro rates, they've increased, but at a much more stable rate. And looking forward, as LNG production or export increases, not only in BC, but across North America, there's going to be more pressure placed on gas that's produced in North America to go to markets in Asia and Europe, which are 5 to 10 times higher at the moment in terms of what they're willing to pay for those. So real incentive to, push gas out of the North American market. And then finally, there's comfort and safety. And that became evident in the 2021 heat dome with all the loss of lives there and the importance of particularly the cooling that comes with heat pumps as well. And we talk about electrification in the roadmap. We're talking about smart electrification. So it's not just a matter of, replacing a furnace with like a gas furnace with an electric furnace. Those days are long behind us. If this is the stacking order that we've put together, this triangle on how we should be thinking about building electrification projects. So in the top half of this, it's around how we use electricity. So first of all, looking for opportunities wherever possible to be more efficient with it, and also to minimize impacts on the grid as far as peak load goes. And then on the bottom part of this triangle, we're looking at generation of electricity and other energy sources. And although the grid will provide the bulk of the work for electrification, looking for opportunities for on-site renewables, thermal energy networks, and then also RNG, particularly RNG for hard to decarbonize buildings, and also where dual fuel systems are being used. And if, we do it smart, we can really minimize the impacts on the electricity grid. This graph here, it's taken from data that I pulled from a report that was published by Clean Energy Canada and work done by Dunsky Energy and Climate Advisors for them. The first bar on this chart is the reference load from the 2025 BC Hydro IRP or Integrated Resource Plan. And that shows in 2040 kind of what they're expecting, that in their moderate projection going forward. And what Dunsky did is they said, okay, well, we increase efforts around electrification. What might we expect to see as far as further capacity on the grid? And what they predicted there was around 1,100 megawatts. So that's that second blue bar that's a little bit higher. And then, and I'll just actually, that bar there is just to show the red line is kind of like where the reference load is, and then everything above that, that blue line is above that would be added to that. And then the next bar, what they looked at, what are all the cost-effective demand response measures that can be taken in British Columbia in the building sector. And when they did that, they actually found there was like close to 3,000 megawatts of cost-effective distributed energy resources. So things like batteries in buildings and EV management systems as well. And then a final analysis they did, it's like, okay, so there's close to 3,000 megawatts. How much of that could actually be realistically put into play during peak demand? And with that, they came up with around 1,700 megawatts. I think I just wanted to show this because we often hear about there's not going to be enough electricity. It's going to break the grid. And what this shows is we can do this, right? If we're smart around how we electrify, that there's lots of resources out there to do this in a smart way that minimizes impacts on the grid. I think it's important to remember this is happening over decades, right? So it's not like someone hits a switch and this all comes on at one time, but it'll be taking place over decades, which gives opportunities to plan for this. Okay. That's the good news. The hard news is that there's still, a lot of persistent challenges out there. First and foremost, there's the incremental capital cost. So, heat pumps and the systems that come with them generally are going to cost more than if you replace like a like-for-like natural gas system or other fossil fuel system. There's the low cost of natural gas, which I mentioned before. So electricity it's about 3 times more expensive than natural gas, which means any electric system that goes in needs to be 3 times more efficient to see positive impacts on utility bills. There's limited market information and signals to decarbonize in buildings. And so if you compare it to EVs, where there's a lot of excitement and interest by people around, EVs and switching to EVs, we don't have that same kind of buzz and awareness around buildings. So that's a challenge. There are gaps in training and experience. We have some of the brightest minds in Canada, if not North America and beyond, that are electrifying our buildings and designing and installing. But there's also a lot of people out there who haven't yet to work on, electrifying a building or are skeptical about doing so. And then the last bullet is a really important one, and it's generally just an absence of strong political leadership in the last couple of years. And this transition, as I noted, it's going to be taking place over many years, and we need that leadership. I think this transition is happening one way or the other because it makes sense, but it's a question of how quick we can make that transition happen, and that leadership is really important. And then when, given the challenge of, okay, how do we make this transition happen? The approach that we took to help guide us was a market transformation approach. And the idea is to look at, what actions can you take over and above what would normally be taking place in the market to really accelerate and grow the transition that you want to see. And when we did that, there were kind of 4 phases or categories that we looked at for different actions. One is like actions to help prepare the market. So these are some like underlying foundational pieces. We looked at actions to support building owners and others, from idea to implementation of projects and things that could be done to support those. And then also looking at actions around ultimately regulating that change as we go forward. And then overarching all of that is the importance of leadership. Okay. And there are 7 key strategies in the roadmap that are kind of fit within those different phases. For lead, the key strategy there is establish strong and persistent leadership on the part of key actors. So that's all levels of governments, it's utilities, it's industry, and so that continuation. This needs strong leadership throughout. We identified 3 strategies around how to prepare the market. One is better data for buildings and reporting on that data. Third strategy, so on our second strategy under prepare, is looking at how to create permanent reductions in the cost of building electrification projects. So these are things that can be done to reduce the soft costs that aren't incentives. And so we have a number of recommendations there. Another one under prepare is to look at, continue to support market readiness and ensure that every heat pump that goes in is it's a high quality installation. Under support the market, there are two key strategies. The first strategy, what we have listed as strategy 5, it's about ensuring that all British Columbians have an opportunity to make the transition and to benefit from electrification. So looking at continuing supports there in that area. And then strategy 6 is more broadly looking at continuing resources that have been in the market for the last number of years to help with building electrification projects, and also in doing more to unlock financing opportunities for projects. And then the last strategy is looking around it's regulating the change. And the key there is to regulate that change well in advance, to send the signals to the market so all the other strategies can be put in place to ensure it's ready for when it comes into effect. And now I'll quickly give some highlights from each of the 4 roadmaps that we did. With existing commercial and and institutional buildings, sorry. In 5 years' time, the goal is that market is ready for a building performance standard. So setting the stage for a province-wide building performance standard, and then for smaller buildings in the commercial sector, looking at highest efficiency equipment standard for things like rooftop units. And then in the shorter term, to ensure we get to that 5-year objective, there needs to be better access to utility data. There needs to be, continued concierge support and education and training, and then also looking at mandatory energy and emissions reporting by 2028. For existing apartment style buildings, we're looking at basically in 5 years' time that retrofits are occurring at scale. I think the demand is already there, particularly for cooling. The question is, how do we make these actually happen in a way that's feasible and can be replicated as quickly as possible? And I think over the next couple of years in particular, it's how do we get as many buildings as possible retrofitted and learn as quickly as possible in terms of what technologies are working best in what building types. With existing buildings or ground-oriented buildings, in 5 years' time, looking at the implementation of the highest efficiency equipment standard for certain types of equipment. In the shorter term, looking at needs-based incentives, so continuing to look at incentives, I think, for apartment buildings and also people with other needs to help them make that switch. And then also an AC to heat pump regulation. So basically, whenever someone wants an AC unit, they'd be installing a heat pump to give them that opportunity to use it for heating as well. And finally, new construction in 5 years' time in climate zones 4 and 5, emissions level 4 would be in place for the zero carbon step code. And in the shorter term, looking at by 2027, zero carbon step code emissions level 3. And I think an important part of this is to ensure that we're continuing to support the industry with education and training. And finally, when we took in all those different actions and we worked with the Building Decarbonization Alliance and their demand side pathways model to look at what the energy and GHG implications are, this is the GHG story that it told us. So from this, there's a couple things that I pull from it anyways. One is that the recommendations in the roadmap will lead to significant GHG emissions reductions. And the second thing is by 2050, we're still not at zero. We still have a ways to go. And that's because it takes, many years before equipment gets replaced in buildings, particularly the larger commercial and institutional buildings. And so that's why that line sort of tapers off a little bit, but it's still going downwards. And I think the key message is it's important to keep pushing forward on these as quickly as possible. And then finally, I think some areas to focus on in the immediate future. One is that utility data access and the importance of that. Municipal reporting and continuing to work with municipalities and support municipal reporting. There's the AC to heat pump regulation and work can be done to support that. And finally, the zero carbon step code emissions level 3. These are areas where collectively we're thinking, okay, where should we put our efforts? These are the 4 areas I would say over the next year that we should really try to focus and encourage our politicians to move forward with. And I think that's it, Mariko.
Thanks so much, Tom. And you did thank a lot of people for participating in this burn process, but I wanted to also really give you a huge shout out and thank you. It was a pleasure working with you too. And the level of research and thoughtfulness that went into these recommendations, including all of the engagement, and you're gathering the stakeholder input and actually really embedding it into this document. I think I'm really proud of what this is today, and I'm really excited to hear how everyone else is reacting to it. So we did launch this document a couple weeks ago in Victoria. It was a great event. We wanted to bring some of that flavor into the webinar as well. So we have invited a couple of industry expert panelists to join us in a conversation to tell us what their organizations are working for in relation to the berm, and then also have more of a panel discussion later in this hour. If you do have questions for our panelists, I encourage you to use the chat for that. That function is available to you. And yeah, we are going to be moving on to that section a little bit later. So just going to present. There we go. So like I mentioned, we have two industry expert panelists. Tom will be joining them after their short presentations. First, we'll hear from Chris Moore, a senior energy specialist at the City of Victoria, who's creating community-oriented policies and programs to modernize new and existing buildings. He also focuses on reducing life cycle carbon emissions, improving energy efficiency, and adapting buildings to climate impacts. Before joining local government, Chris worked as an HVAC design engineer and holds a Master of Engineering Leadership from UBC. And second, you'll hear from Ian Cullis. He's the Vice President of Sustainability at Landlord BC. Ian is experienced in asset management, financial sustainability, and community engagement within the rental building sector, with over 10 years of hands-on experience. So over to you, Chris.
Thanks, Mariko. Hi, everyone. Today, I wanted to share a little bit about the City of Victoria's journey for electrification in new buildings. And as of the end of 2024, we've adopted the highest level of zero carbon step code for all new buildings. And I wanted to compare this, show some data when we looked at development. And really, the takeaway here is that we haven't seen zero carbon step code slowing down housing development here. So these are a couple of graphs. It's a lot of data, but the different colors are different building types, from multi-unit residential buildings in yellow and single-family homes in blue. And the dotted lines are when we adopted the highest level of zero carbon step code for Part 9 buildings, and then all buildings is the green line. And so building permit applications, we've seen a general decline in single-family home building permit applications, but we didn't see that worsened by step code, and we actually saw an uptick in building permit applications in all other building types. And in terms of approved number of housing units, we've seen those go up significantly in the last few years, and really no indication that zero carbon step code regulation slowed that down. And I think this all just speaks to the fact that there are a number of factors in development decisions, and probably the biggest being development policy and zoning. And the City of Victoria has changed their zoning significantly in the last few years, and we have a new official community plan trying to unlock housing across the city in order to address the housing crisis. And we've seen that this has worked even with the incorporation of zero carbon step code, and we're meeting our provincial housing targets. Next slide. And we also saw some evidence that zero carbon step code was really just reinforcing already existing trends in development of decarbonization. So these show the greenhouse gas intensity as shown on step code compliance forms submitted with building permits for both Part 3 buildings and Part 9 buildings. And so we've seen over the last several years, in both cases, there'd been a downward trend in greenhouse gas intensity, and then the institution of the zero carbon step code regulation really just solidified that in city policy. And Yeah, I think this is just indicates that the development industry has been, seeing policy signals and also responding to market demand for cooling through heat pumps, for example. Uh, and so really just kind of the regulation has been riding the wave. And so, yeah, now after roughly 2 years of zero carbon step code, we've really seen no downside and are still kind of achieving our targets both in development and climate action. Next slide. So, lastly, just wanted to touch briefly on our kind of new focus of looking at existing buildings, and we have a few important pillars here. One is we're supporting a regional benchmarking program in southern Vancouver Island, uh, in the Capital Regional District, allowing buildings to submit their energy data to the city that will be foundational for future policy development and learning, and also showing building owners more information about their building and how it performs. And we're supporting retrofit concierge services, including for rental apartments through Landlord BC with Ian. That really helps building owners think through the process of retrofits and make decisions and apply for grants and uh, help work through that decision-making process. We're also with Zeke supporting the Strata Energy Advisor for Strata buildings. And lastly, we have a retrofit tax exemption for rental buildings for a number of rental MURBs. We allow them to recoup the cost of a retrofit through municipal tax exemptions. And I may touch more on this in the panel discussion, but I think this is a really easily instituted method for local governments to support some pilot retrofit projects in an existing building space. And that's my quick update, and I will pass it on to Ian.
All
Thanks,
right,
Chris.
oh, there you go.
It took me a second to find the unmute button, but here we go. And I think that was a fantastic overview of the work you're doing. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to speak about how Landlord BC is supporting rental building owners navigate the retrofit ecosystem. One of the things we're seeing very clearly in the rental housing sector is that the challenge isn't simply technology or cost. It's implementation complexity. So building owners are trying to navigate technical decisions, financing, tenant impacts, electrical constraints, and capital planning timelines all at the same time. And without support, that complexity often leads to delays, deferred action, or like-for-like replacements. So the role of Landlord BC, the Rental Apartment Retrofit Accelerator, and our broader sustainability work is to bridge the gap between ambition and implementation. And that aligns closely with several priorities in the updated Building Electrification Roadmap, including access to utility data, retrofit concierge support services, pilot projects, and reducing implementation barriers. Our role really is not to introduce complexity, it's to help organize what already exists. That means helping owners understand their buildings, navigate retrofit pathways, and connect with incentives, financing, and technical expertise. And we're starting to see that progression happening at scale, with hundreds of buildings entering the pipeline for the Landlord BC's Rental Apartment Retrofit Accelerator, and many already progressing through benchmarking, opportunity assessments, and feasibility studies. Because ultimately, acceleration doesn't come from more programs alone, it comes from making the decisions easy. Next slide, please. So what Landlord BC is building is not simply a collection of programs. It's a broader support system for the rental housing sector that includes benchmarking, data development, retrofit coaching, business case tools, pilot projects, tenant support tools, and partnerships with municipalities like the City of Victoria and Saanich, BC Hydro, Zeke, and other industry associations. And these areas align directly with the roadmap recommendations. A major focus for us is helping owners understand where they are, what realistic pathways forward look like, and how to align decisions today with capital renewal cycles and a future plan for their building. because timing matters. Most large retrofit projects happen when systems reach end of life, when operational issues emerge, or when buildings are already undergoing major renewals. And increasingly, especially right now, we're seeing tenant retention as a major driver of action. So the key for us is trying to reduce implementation friction and help owners to navigate fragmented information around incentives, financing, permitting, procurement, electrical capacity, and technical pathways. And our role really is helping to connect those pieces into a manageable process because electrification at scale requires more than incentives alone. It requires trusted support systems, continuity, coordination, and implementation experience that can help projects move from interest to action. Last slide, please, Mariko. And this is an example of what that looks like in practice. And Chris actually identified this building when it first popped up, but this is a 1970s rental apartment building with approximately 90 units. Like many buildings we work with, the gas heating system was approaching end of life, while at the same time the owner is dealing with overheating, tenant comfort concerns. Now, ideally, you'd look at full building electrification. But in reality, electrical capacity, capital constraints made that difficult. So instead, this project started incrementally, beginning with a limited number of in-suite heat pumps to improve comfort, reduce overheating, and begin creating that pathway towards broader, greater electrification. And I think this is where some of the most important learning is happening. First, timing is everything. End-of-life replacement cycles are where we have the greatest opportunity. Second, electrical capacity in the buildings continues to be a barrier and a concern for owners. And third, incremental retrofits are not a compromise. They're a practical pathway forward. If we wait for perfect conditions, we're going to miss a lot of projects. If we start with smaller projects, we can gradually work towards the full retrofit. And I think there's key there around reducing uncertainty. We can build momentum over time. And ultimately, if we want to scale electrification across the rental housing sector, programs, policies need to reflect the operational and financial realities. And I think one of the great things about the berm that Tom has created is he's taken that input and really incorporated the timelines into that plan. So thank you. That's a good overview of what Landlord BC is doing.
Thank you so much, Chris and Ian, for sharing. I think one of the really key things that we want to pull out of this BERM implementation is that it's not, it's not this like document that's like, oh, we should do all these things. A lot of things are already happening and underway in various capacities. So I think it's really interesting just to like pull that perspective in and remind people that yeah, we are all in this together and we're already doing a lot of great work that aligns with these recommendations. So Victoria, I'll get you to spotlight our panelists, so Ian, Chris, and Tom. And then we'll just have a little bit of a discussion before we head into a Q&A from the audience. So panelists, Tom, I think you mentioned a couple things, but I'm really interested in hearing what is the top BERM action that you'd like to see advance in the near term? So what's most important to the industry you're in or from your perspective individually? I invite one of you to just start speaking first and then the others can jump in too.
Oh, we're all too polite. Okay, I'll jump in. I was gonna hold off. I would say for me, top of my wish list, because it's like easy, is just utility data access, right? Is so important for larger buildings, medium-sized buildings, and it's just like such an easy thing to do. Let's just do it. So that would be the top of my list.
Yeah, as someone rolling out a regional benchmarking program that would have made our lives a lot easier. We definitely, utilities have all this information, but they can't share it directly at present. So there's all this complexity between tenants and building owners and organizations. But from a municipal lens, I did want to reiterate around this retrofit tax exemption program. Please steal this idea if you work with a municipality. I think it's an interesting approach that can achieve council buy-in that direct cash incentives just couldn't, especially in these economic times. So yeah, if it's something you're interested in your municipality, please reach out. We would be happy to share how we structured that program. It's not a silver bullet solution, but it can definitely get some pilot retrofits going in your community. And as you know, I like to Ian used the phrase just building momentum over time. It's a perfect way to get that kick started. And then at a higher level, I think just advocating for these actions to the province is something everyone can do and get this on their radar. There needs to be some big decisions over the next, you know, 5 years, 10 years to get us there. So all that advocacy work is really important.
Before you hop in, Ian, there's a question from Meredith in the chat just around the tax exemption. Is that sort of a workaround for the persistently missing PACE legislation?
I wouldn't call it a workaround. I think PACE is definitely much more scalable and would be a better replacement. But yeah, in the meantime, it's a way to support retrofits at a small scale, and it's less, I think, administratively burdensome as PACE for a municipality. So I think a good place to start, well, maybe PACE can continue, or motivation for PACE can continue.
I like the highlights that Chris and Tom have provided. I think access to data is extremely important. We need to make sure that data is translated into something that is actionable by building owners. Um, I also think that the City of Victoria and Sanchez tax exemption programs are something that's scalable, and provide a great pathway forward for providing funding for retrofits. Um, and I do believe that continuing the support for the concierge type services is really important as well. So I think that would be my focus. Um, and we're seeing interest in that support going forward. So I think with those things, we could really see some good action on the retrofit front.
Thanks all. I'm going to add one. I didn't know I was going to be part of this panel, but I really like the reversing valve policy recommendation as well, where basically all air conditioners should be heat pumps that are permanently installed. I think, we have the technology available today. We have systems. We have ways through Energy Efficiency Act and there's ways to make it happen. So that's one that's a priority for me, and I'd love to see implemented in the shorter term.
Yeah, and I think for new construction, like EL3 in climate zones 4 and 5 next year, like it just let's do it, and people write to your MLAs and ministers and just ask for that because I think it's something it's very achievable.
Yeah, and I also wanted to acknowledge, I think there was some a little bit in the chat about feasibility in northern climates, and I think this is something that really was taken into consideration within the BRM recommendations, and that's why some policy recommendations like Action 29 that's focused around energy and zero carbon step code really do focus on climate zones 4 and 5 first, and then assess the feasibility for other climate zones outside of the coastal area. Okay, so I also wanted to ask you if you could tell us about one challenge and or one opportunity that might impact short-term implementation. You can answer either.
I'll jump in with an opportunity. I think the extreme concern for extreme heat is really pressing as we come into summer. It's a really important health and safety issue we need to address, and it ties in very closely with electrification, as heat pumps are probably the best um, solution for extreme heat in buildings. So I think there's a real opportunity there to try and connect those dots in terms of advocacy and policy decisions and supports. So I think we can all as collectively get a little creative on how to address both of these issues hand in hand.
Okay, I'll jump in. I think the jobs opportunity, like the job story here, is undertold and not well. Yeah, I think we need to do a lot better job, especially where there's so much focus on economic development, jobs. Like these are jobs throughout BC, right? Like good paying, skilled jobs that will be there for years and years and years ahead. And I think that's the part of the story that we really need to be telling a lot more than we currently are. So that's an opportunity that's sitting there waiting for us to tell it better.
Yeah, so I agree with both. I think there's an opportunity for jobs here, and there's thousands and thousands of buildings that need work. I think we need to take care and make sure we're like sequencing everything properly. I think would be one of the big keys for me, especially as like some of these pressing issues right now, like the heat dome. And I agree completely. I think we need to do something. It's just the key is not to do something that compromises us or actions later on. So I think really looking at our building stock and making sure people are safe and comfortable, and we're looking at those long-term actions that create affordability while at the same time supporting and keeping our residents, tenants healthy, I think would be the key for me. So not doing anything quick, but looking at that long game that's like, this is what we need to do to support everyone going forward. And I think that the tax exemption is a good example of a big program that could be a big win.
That's great. Thank you all for your insights on that. I have one more question before we hop into the audience Q&A. So we do have a roadmap for existing apartment style residential buildings, but we have heard that stratas need a slightly different approach due to their ownership model. Can any of the presenters speak to that?
So as far as like stratas, like what
Yeah. What
needs
makes them
to,
different and what might they need that's slightly different than the other recommendations in the berm?
all right, I will go out carefully on this based on it's the decision-making model, right? And ownership, like the shared ownership of the asset makes it challenging, for financing perspectives, to get financing for projects, and then also just to get agreement to move forward with projects is challenging, even if it's one suite or a whole building. And so those are, yeah, I would say from when I look at the strata and what I know of the strata sector, those are two particularly, I think, unique hurdles there to be addressed.
Yeah, I agree. And I think just understanding that stratas have their own individual problems that will need to be solved, and not grouping them in with just based on building type, but also ownership type when we are coming up with policies and solutions and incentives as well. Just important to make that distinction.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting piece about the building stock. It's easy to group them into multi-unit residential buildings, but then each kind of sector, stratas, nonprofit, market rental, family, they each need something slightly different and slightly different tweaks to the program. So all of the different ownership types need to be taken into account as programs are developed.
All right, I'm gonna move into some of the audience questions. Um, there's a question from John about reducing costs and making things more affordable. So, currently the workforce is in transition. Do we have any on thoughts on how we can reduce costs and make things more affordable.
Yeah, there's four things in the burn that we talk about cost specifically. I'll try to see if I can recall them all off the top of my head. One is just permitting, like just more streamlined. I'm actually working on a project right now around permitting for heat pumps. I think most municipalities in BC, it's fairly straightforward. There are a few where it's pretty complicated, and I think as particularly in the apartment building sector, that could be kind of this hidden challenge if permitting becomes difficult to do. And so that's one area is looking at how can we streamline permitting to ensure, safety, but also to move those projects forward as quickly as possible. Another is around steps like measures that can be done or opening up possibilities around power efficient design, right? So how can we max out the efficiency, like the power that already is in buildings and use energy management systems there. So that's another area that, anytime you can avoid electrical upgrade, you're going to be saving significant dollars. And another one I heard, that's in the berm. It has to do with boots on the ground. And this is maybe more on the residential side. But the more specialization you have of people on a job, the more boots you need on the ground at that job, and the longer it takes to coordinate and the more coordination. And so making it easier to have fewer, like I think of it as like fewer boots with more skills. And the more we can do in that area, I think is another way that we can reduce cost on projects. So those are mine.
One of the big ones I heard recently was just actually implementing some of these retrofits. So I went on a tour earlier this year of a site that had implemented fairly deep energy retrofit, done windows, space heating to heat pumps, domestic hot water to heat pumps, and weather sealing. Costs 3.5 million. And they were implementing a second building, which was double the size, but the same cost. So I think as we go through the process, we end up de-risking the process as people learn more about it, and then reducing the cost as we move forward. So I think part of it is just doing projects and getting that experience and, yeah, de-risking things.
Thanks, Ian. I think that's true for retrofits and for new construction as well, because I feel like I've heard from many builders that, the first project that you take on maybe is a little bit more expensive as you're learning different components, new strategies, but then your efficiencies gain tremendously the more projects you take on. So. Another question, there's a bit of back and forth in the chat on this, but it's Jeff works with builders of new houses in the Okanagan. And currently, the provincial standard for zero carbon step code is EL1. So many are not really thinking about zero carbon step code. So our recommendation in the berm is to go to EL3. Why wouldn't we be considering EL2 to help builders get used to it? Tom, I feel like this is probably a question for you.
Yeah, I think there was already like 50%, I think, is the number. Around 50% of buildings, be new constructions already meeting the higher tiers of the zero carbon step code. So I would just argue why not, the counter argument is why not just go to zero carbon step code 4? And I think like 3 leaves quite a bit of room still for dual fuel systems and for gas. And so I think going to 3 helps push the envelope towards 4 and get the sector ready. It still leaves lots of room for bringing in gas strategically into those projects. And so I think we're ready, particularly in looking at climate zones 4 and 5 specifically, which is why we zeroed in on those and just the, warmer climates of the province as well. So less need for, supplemental gas on the coldest days.
Thanks, Tom. I think this one is likely for you too. From Stephen, in one of your first slides, you showed the reverse hierarchy with energy efficiency at the top. So is this more about using the most optimal cost-effective energy efficiency strategies, or are we talking about deep retrofits?
Yeah, optimal. The first A. I think deep retrofits are great for those people that want to do them, but I just don't see it as scalable. And I don't honestly see it as necessary as well, right? In a lot of cases, but doing what you can do that makes sense. And it's not just about efficiency, it's also about improving your comforts, right? In the home by doing some efficiency upgrades as well. But yeah, it's more around optimizing where possible. So keeping your eyes open, looking for those opportunities.
That's great. I'm not seeing. Okay, actually, there's another question from Roberto about the AC to heat pump reversing valve policy recommendation. Should this be more of a federal or provincial pursuit? The city of Vancouver was able to do it. So yeah, just thoughts. I mean, this is a provincial roadmap, but I'm curious if you can speak to the federal piece as well.
I think I would happily take either. I think though that it's likely to happen quicker at the provincial level because with the federal, you've got like in BC, the challenge is always, you've got, the different climate zones, but it's relatively contained, right? But we've got to consider like implications on colder climate zones, whereas across Canada, you're multiplying that by many factors, right? And so I think I would I would love to see it go federally. I suspect it'll be done provincially before federal, though. But either would be wonderful. The province would still actually. Anyways, I won't get into details, but yeah, I would say provincial is probably where I would put most of my energy there.
Okay, that's great. So, in a moment, I'm going to talk to people about our stakeholder engagement activity that I'm going to invite everyone to participate in. But in the spirit of doing that engagement activity, I'd love to hear each of the panelists tell us what they're committing to working on next to advance. So I know you talked about some of your priority actions, but what is one thing that you might be doing next to help advance something within the berm?
I'll go first again, I guess. I'm not comfortable with silence, I think that's the issue here. There's a few projects I'm working on. One, like I'd mentioned before, there's one around heat pump permitting, and so that's one I think is and a subtle but important piece of work. But also just how do we move these actions forward, right? Around implementation and ensuring we're having lots of conversations with lots of people who need to be reassured that this does matter. People still do care about climate, and then also the jobs benefits that come with this and other benefits as well. And that this is doable, right? And so I think that's something I really want to be pushing on myself and working with others on going forward.
I
Thanks, Tom.
think so. For Landlord BC, we're looking at building partnerships, and ultimately those partnerships really are to support projects like Chris's tax exemption program, but we're also building a database. We're building tools to support the decision making, and developing a coaching service ourselves so that, and in collaboration with our partners, but to really advance and support and accelerate retrofits within the rental market.
Yeah, and for me, I mentioned this benchmarking program we're rolling out, which we're really excited about. And I think the next step after that is once all these building owners have information about their building and their energy use and their relative efficiency, how do we communicate the benefits of making building improvements, whether they're small like recommissioning or big like a full retrofit? So I think that communications piece and how we help educate and help folks understand these benefits will be an important next step.
That's great. So I'm going to take a moment now just to thank all of you for your contribution to this webinar and your input. And I'm going to move into a quick activity that I'm really hoping that everyone can participate in. So just gonna, oh, no, sorry. Okay, let me just go through the slides and you can see them in fast motion again. All right. So throughout our berm rollout process, we had a number of stakeholders engaged through workshops, interviews, and then everyone who had participated and contributed to the recommendations within the berm was also given an opportunity to review the draft. And so we also during that time asked everyone, what they might consider working on, or actions they might take to help advance the berm further once it's published. So this is just a summary of kind of the types of activities that people were interested in doing to advance berm actions. Now, the berm itself is going to require collaboration from all of us. And so we wanted to get a sense from the people in the room, what are you planning to work on? So hopefully you've heard something within the webinar today that is going to inspire you to take action yourself. So I encourage you, we're going to drop a link to, oh, Carrie just did a survey into the chat, and we want you to tell us a little bit about what you're working on. So you'll have the opportunity to answer any of the 4 sector, or tell us what you're going to do in any of the 4 sector roadmaps. If you don't feel like that section is relevant to you, please skip it. And if you haven't fully read the berm yet, you can also keep this open. We'll leave this survey open for a little bit. We just want to hear who and what is happening within the community, and we'd love to hear from you about what that is. So another thing, oh, Anna just dropped this in the chat too. If you're not already involved with B2E, please join the over 260 organizations who are already involved in this coalition. Together, we are going to be working on berm implementation. It is free to join and it's very easy, and it helps you to stay connected with the people who are involved in building decarbonization through electrification. I don't think I have a slide on this, but we also are going to be having an in-person one-day symposium in New Westminster at the end of, or sorry, towards the end of this year on October 21st. So I'd love for you to save the date. And we'd love to see a lot of you at that event as well. More details will be coming soon on that. One more event that I'd love to tell you about. We are trying to get into different regions of the province. I mentioned that we were in Victoria last week. We'll be also having an event on June 3rd and 4th in Kelowna. So if you are from the interior region or anywhere within driving distance, or we'd love to see you at that as well. So please take a look on the BC Green Building calendar, and we hope to see you at one of our in-person events in the future. So once again, I want to thank our presenters and panelists. So Tom, thank you for the excellent presentation and sharing our key highlights from the berm. Ian and Chris, thank you for being part of our panel and sharing what your organizations are doing to advance building electrification within the province. And then I want to thank everyone here who's joining us today. We appreciate all of your contribution to decarbonizing BC's building stock, and we look forward to seeing you at future events. So thanks, everyone.
And thank you. Bye.
Bye.